6 years ago, I found myself working alongside an extraordinary group of people who were trying to figure out if there was a practical, scalable solution to polarization. And I joined the group because of a road trip I'd been on 2 years earlier while I was in college. In the summer after my junior year, I borrowed my mom's car, the Mazda CX-9, it was our family's kid hauler, and drove 7,100 miles across the country. I spent 2 months living in 3 towns: Cotulla, Texas, Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and Cleveland, Ohio. Now, each of those towns was a world away from my own hometown, and I was led to believe that that would create some friction. To my delight and surprise, though, the opposite happened, and this guy soon found himself drinking beer with ranchers at a broken-down honky-tonk in the brush country, eating a raw bison heart on the South Dakota plains, and then singing to the high heavens with the Baptists on Sunday morning. I was welcomed, adopted everywhere I went, and that adventure soon became the most profound and transformative experience of my young life. And those 2 months, along with the research we conducted 2 years later, unearthed a quiet but extraordinary discovery. My group and I traveled around the country, all regions, all walks of life, all types of folks, and we heard when we talked to young people that they were voicing a common complaint to a question. When we asked kids, what's your least favorite thing about where you're growing up? They said, I feel like I'm growing up in a bubble, and I've never seen life outside it. Well, it's no wonder. Kids today are growing up in bubbles. American towns and neighborhoods are becoming more and more politically and socioeconomically homogeneous. And this subjects young people to the same attitudes, perspectives, and futures again and again, limiting their growth by narrowing their horizons and their connections. And when you dig into the data, it shows the outcomes. 3/4 of white Americans don't have a friend who's not white. 40% have never even met a farmer. Even at the altar, only 4% of newlyweds cross the political aisle when they walk down the literal aisle. I believe we're shunning each other because we're afraid of each other. And we're afraid of each other because we don't know one another. And so our team thought, here's our opportunity to intervene. Let's literally bring young people into each other's homes, into one another's lives. I mean, millions do it on exchange programs every year. Why not try that here? And that's why today, some 6 years later, we at the American Exchange Project have created a first-of-its-kind, free, domestic exchange program. And that ain't Photoshop. That really happened last summer. We send kids in the summer after they graduate from high school on a free week-long trip to an American town that is radically different from the one that they grew up in. Boston, Massachusetts to Sheridan, Wyoming. Dodge City, Kansas, up the road to Palo Alto, California. The swamps of Lake Charles, Louisiana, go to the glaciers of Anchorage, Alaska. Those kids go swimming in that lake every summer. It's why I haven't visited the Anchorage Exchange yet. They immerse themselves on another side of American life. They experience culture as if they were locals, eat their food, breathe their air. And after weeks with peers and with a host family, people they would have otherwise judged with bias become dear friends. And a town that once felt far away, a blip on a Google map, becomes a second home. Then they go back to their own hometowns, and they give their version of the gift they just received. Over the last 4 summers, 1,000 students on 150 exchanges to 70 towns and 36 states have enjoyed this adventure. And it works over and over, again and again. Thank you. Surveys have shown bias going down significantly, faith in their fellow Americans, a low thing in Gen Z these days, going up significantly, and on average, 2.7, I call it 3, new friends in their networks that weren't there before. As for stories, too many to tell. Students who've changed majors, changed colleges, sought out new career opportunities because of exchange. Students who learned to swim, climbed their first mountain, caught their first fish. Or deeper than that, who've opened their minds about reproductive rights, or religion, or very simply, the validity of another point of view. There's the San Franciscan at culinary school who said no thanks to jobs in LA and Paris and went back to cook in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. the host mom who said, I have a daughter in Texas and now I have a daughter in New York. That guy there, who when I asked him about his trip to California said, shoot, man, I've never talked about my feelings so many times in my life. It's funny because it's true, you know? Anyway. Then there's Andrew. Andrew grew up in a small city in New England, in a neighborhood that was so rough his mother wouldn't let him out of the house at night. And while he grew up protected, he also grew up with many of the developmental shortcomings of a kid who was just massively unexposed to the world. In fact, we put him on his first airplane ride, and he was so nervous that we had to bring in a staff member to join him through the experience. But when that young man got up in the air and looked out the window and saw the world, his world, from a whole new angle, his anxiety turned to wonder. We sent him to Kilgore, Texas, an oil town in the pine country of East Texas. One day, Andrew, with the group, went to work on a ranch, and he got out of the van and saw before him, for the first time in real life, a horse. Now, this was no stuffed animal or a cartoon character, but a real-life horse, muscular, tall, kind of smelly, with a mind of its own. And all at once, fear and curiosity gripped him. And Reese, the rancher he was working for that day, saw this petrified young man and walked up to him and said, go pet it. But keep in mind that if he senses you're nervous, he's going to be nervous too. So very calmly, they walked up together, Reese by Andrew's side, and Andrew reached his gentle hand out. Within 30 minutes, he'd become the Connecticut Kid. He was high up on the cattle guard, whacking cows in the backside, and yah, and yeehaw. He said it so many times, the cowboys had to go up to him and be like, Andrew, we don't really say yeehaw in Texas. It's not a thing, yeah. Like so many of our students out in the world, out in the sun, Andrew blossomed. He found a version of himself that he was proud of and surrounded himself with connections who could help him grow fully into that person. And I know because of their friendship, Reese grew too. 6 months later, back home, some very serious mental health issues had stalled Andrew's life. And to help himself through, he called Reese every day. I often imagine where we'd be if every Andrew had a Reese and every Reese had an Andrew. And that's why I believe the American Exchange Project needs to be as common to the high school experience as the prom. Together, we can mobilize a generation to embark on a coming-of-age adventure that will blunt the edge of prejudice and in the aggregate stitch together our divided country. The vast majority of Americans are kind, honest people. And I implore you all to follow our students' example. Point your compasses in an unfamiliar direction. Land in a foreign hometown. Meet a stranger and ask a few questions. You never know what you might discover. Thank you.